There's a story the church never finished, a name it demonized, and a truth it buried. For centuries, we've been told that Lucifer was an angel, God's brightest creation, who grew too proud and fell from heaven like lightning. That story is written into the sermons, the songs, the stained glass of cathedrals. It's a story everyone thinks they know. But what if it was wrong? What if Lucifer was never an angel at all? What if he wasn't cast out of heaven? What if he was crowned here on earth? In the remote highlands of Ethiopia, sealed away in stone churches older than the Vatican, sacred scrolls whisper a different version of the story. A version so ancient, so dangerous, it never made it into the Western Bible. According to these forbidden scriptures, Lucifer wasn't a fallen spirit, but a human king, a man with power, pride, and a hunger to be worshipped as a god. This isn't a theory. It's not a conspiracy. It's a line of truth stretching back thousands of years, preserved in the oldest Christian tradition, still alive today. And if it's true, then everything we thought we knew about evil changes. Because if Lucifer was a man, then history is full of Lucifers, and one of them may be wearing his crown right now. So don't blink, because in the final chapter of this video, we'll confront the most disturbing question of all. Who is Lucifer today? Stay with us. Once you see how this story ends, you won't be able to unsee it. Comment below, "I'm ready to see through the lies." Tap like if this already challenged what you've been taught, and hit subscribe. We uncover ancient truths that the world was never meant to hear.
We begin with a verse you've probably heard before. "How you were fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning." It's poetic, powerful, and for centuries it has been used as the foundation of one of Christianity's most enduring beliefs, that Lucifer was once an angel of light who rebelled against God and was cast out of heaven. But what if we've been reading it wrong the entire time? The verse comes from Isaiah 14:12, but if you open a Hebrew Bible, if you look at the original language, it doesn't say Lucifer at all. It says Helel ben Shachar, which translates to Shining One, Son of the Dawn. And more importantly, it's not talking about Satan. It's not even talking about an angel. This chapter of Isaiah was written as a mockery, a prophetic taunt against a real-world king, most likely the king of Babylon, a man so arrogant, so drunk on power, that he tried to exalt himself above God. The passage paints a picture of his fall, not from heaven, but from his throne, not spiritual exile, but political collapse. So where did the name Lucifer even come from? Centuries later, when the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Latin, Saint Jerome used the word Lucifer, Latin for light bearer, as a poetic equivalent for Hello. It wasn't a name, it was an evil. In Latin, it was even used to describe Christ in some hymns. But over time, the word Lucifer took on a life of its own. Western tradition fused it with medieval imagery, Dante's Inferno and Paradise Lost, the fallen angel with wings of fire thrown down to hell. And that one misunderstood verse, it became canon, doctrine, untouchable. But Ethiopia never made that mistake. The ancient Ethiopian church, grounded in manuscripts far older than the Latin Vulgate, preserved the context. To them, this was never about a spiritual rebellion in the clouds. It was about a man, a king, a pattern of hubris that the scriptures warn us will repeat again and again throughout history. A man who rose too high and fell harder than anyone before him. Now pause for a moment and think. If the Lucifer of Isaiah was a real human ruler, then how many other so-called spiritual truths have been taken out of context? How many doctrines were born from a translation, not a revelation? And more chillingly, what happens when we stop looking for the devil in the shadows and start looking for him on the throne? Because once you see how deep this misunderstanding goes, you'll start to question not just one verse, but the entire framework we were taught to believe. And the deeper you go, the more one truth becomes painfully clear. Lucifer may not have been a fallen angel after all. He may have been the first God King. And in Ethiopia, that truth is not controversial. It's scripture. So if we've just cracked open the door on this forbidden interpretation, what exactly did Ethiopia find behind it? Because their ancient texts go even further, naming names, describing rulers, and painting a terrifying portrait of what happens when pride, power, and divinity mix. Let's go there, because what comes next will change the way you see the devil forever.
If Lucifer wasn't an angel, then what was he? Ethiopian scriptures offer a provocative answer. He was a king, a man, but not just any man. He was a ruler who crossed a sacred line, the line between man and God. In ancient Ethiopia, that line was thinner than in most places. Here, kings were not just political leaders, they were divine figures, spiritual conduits, chosen vessels said to descend from the bloodline of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, a union that in the Ethiopian tradition gave birth to a royal legacy blessed by heaven itself. This is not mythology, it is history, written in the Kebra Nagast, the national epic of Ethiopia, revered by generations of kings and priests. And within its pages lies a powerful truth. In Ethiopia, to rule was to represent the will of God. But to go beyond that, to become God, was blasphemy of the highest order. And that's exactly what some kings tried to do. In Gea's texts, we find references to a figure called Halo Ben Shar, translated similarly to Son of the Morning. He is not described as a celestial being, but as a human ruler, a man who committed the unforgivable sin, claiming divinity for himself. Sound familiar? It echoes Nimrod, the builder of Babel, Pharaoh, who hardened his heart and defied heaven, Nebuchadnezzar, who looked over his empire and declared, "Is not this great Babylon that I have built by the might of my power?" Each of these men sought not just to rule, but to rise above the stars. Each one fits the same pattern, the same fall. And in Ethiopian tradition, that pattern has a name: Lucifer. But it doesn't stop there. The Book of the Mysteries of Heaven and Earth, a sacred text preserved only in Ethiopian monasteries, speaks of rulers whose ambitions corrupted not only their kingdoms, but the spiritual order itself. These kings didn't fall from heaven. They dragged heaven down with them. Because in Ethiopia's worldview, politics is never just politics. It's spiritual warfare, fought through crowns, bloodlines, and declarations of divine right. To the West, Lucifer is a fallen angel. To Ethiopia, he is Pharaoh. He is Babylon. He is Rome. He is any ruler who dares to seat himself above God. And in this framework, Lucifer is not a one-time event. He is a repeating cycle. He appears whenever pride meets power, whenever rulers stop serving their people and start demanding worship, whenever a king looks into the mirror and sees a god staring back. Now, imagine this. If Lucifer is a title, not a name, if it's a warning, not a being, then how many Lucifers has history already seen? And more urgently, how many walk among us today? This is where Ethiopia's theology becomes not just spiritual, but terrifyingly practical. Because it tells us this: Lucifer isn't hiding in hell. He's sitting in thrones, standing behind podiums, signing laws, wearing robes. He doesn't need horns. He just needs people to believe he's untouchable. And that's exactly what these God Kings wanted: to be above judgment, above consequence, above God. But Ethiopia's texts do not honor them. They warn us about them. They record their rise, their deception, and their eventual collapse. And now, for the first time, those warnings are resurfacing. So the next question isn't just about who Lucifer was. It's about how we recognize him when he shows up again. Because in the next section, we'll go deeper. We'll trace how this pattern of pride and power became encoded in the very way we think about evil, and why we've been looking in the wrong place the entire time.
What if the devil wasn't a single person, but a repeating pattern? What if Lucifer wasn't just someone who lived once, long ago, but someone who keeps showing up again and again, wearing different crowns, waving different flags, delivering different speeches? In the Ethiopian worldview, evil is not just supernatural. It is political. It is historical. It is human. Lucifer is not simply a name, he is a warning. A signal that something has gone terribly wrong, not just in the heavens, but here on earth. And if we listen closely, that warning plays on repeat throughout the rise and fall of empires. It begins when a man believes he is more than a man, when leadership becomes lordship, when justice becomes self-worship, and when power stops serving and starts consuming. This is where Ethiopia's theology breaks from the West in a powerful way. Because while the Western Church paints Satan as a dragon, a serpent, a shadowy force hiding in the dark, the Ethiopian tradition says no. Evil does not always hide. Sometimes it wears a crown. Sometimes it stands at the pulpit. Sometimes it wins elections. Lucifer, then, is not just a being. He is a political archetype, a formula, repeating itself in any era where pride rises unchecked. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "The greatest evil is not done in those sordid dens of crime that Dickens loved to paint, but in clean, carpeted offices, by quiet men with white collars and cut fingernails." That quote, written decades ago, feels eerily familiar today. Because the pattern of Lucifer isn't loud at first. It's silent, it whispers, it flatters, and then it rules. Ethiopian scriptures teach that this pattern is older than Rome, older than Babylon, older than memory itself. It's embedded in the very temptation that began in Eden: "Ye shall be as gods." But here's the twist. Lucifer doesn't fall alone. His pride drags others down with him, entire kingdoms, cultures, faiths. The fall is collective. The consequences, generational. And just like the kings before him, Nimrod, Pharaoh, Nebuchadnezzar, every Lucifer leaves behind not only destruction, but myth. A myth that cloaks tyranny in divine language, that calls oppression order, that calls power divine right. And this is where it becomes dangerous. Because once a man claims divinity, who can question him? Once a ruler becomes a god, who dares resist?
This is why Ethiopian monks preserved their warnings, not in metaphors, but in stories, not in doctrines, but in patterns. They knew that Lucifer was not bound to one era. He would return, and each time he would adapt. That's the real terror of Lucifer. He doesn't come as fire and fury. He comes as law, as tradition, as salvation. He offers peace, then takes everything. And by the time people realize what he is, it's already too late. So the question becomes, how do you fight a pattern? How do you resist something that always comes dressed as hope? Maybe the first step is to recognize it, to call it by its true name, to name the pattern, even if we can't yet name the man. Because when we stop looking for horns and start looking for hubris, we might just see the real Lucifer, not in the fire, but in the mirror. And if that doesn't unsettle you, the next part will. Because while Ethiopia warned us about the pattern, it also preserved the books that named it. The scriptures the West erased. The books that told the story as it really was. So next we'll step into the shadows, into the scrolls the church banned, the texts that Vatican councils buried, and the ancient voices that refuse to stay silent. What's written in them will shake you.
Why would anyone want to erase Scripture? Why would church fathers, councils, and translators, people tasked with preserving divine truth, choose to silence entire books of the Bible? To answer that, we have to go back to a time when the Christian world was not yet one world. Before the Roman Church, before the King James Bible, before the West claimed authority over what is sacred and what is not. Because while Europe was still debating which books belonged, Ethiopia had already preserved the ones that were forgotten. Texts like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Book of the Mysteries of Heaven and Earth, and others found only in the ancient Gez language, untouched by Latin hands, unedited by Roman bishops. These weren't just poetic writings or mystical tales. They were foundational scriptures, passed down, copied by monks, hidden in mountaintop monasteries and guarded like treasure. And they told a very different story. In these books, the fall of Lucifer isn't abstract or angelic. It's political. It's historical. It's personal. They speak of rulers who tried to exalt themselves, kings who corrupted the divine order, empires that claimed godhood and collapsed under the weight of their own arrogance. And they don't call these men Satan in the way the West does. They use titles like the Son of the Morning or He who declared himself God, men whose sin wasn't rebellion in heaven but pride on earth. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. These books were intentionally excluded from the Western canon. At councils like Nicaea and Laodicea, religious leaders decided which scriptures to keep and which to cast aside. And the ones that challenged the divinity of kings, that painted Lucifer as a man and not a demon, that warned people to be wary of leaders who claim divine authority without divine wisdom, they were buried because to keep power, you must control the narrative. And to control the narrative, you must control the text. Let me be clear, this isn't just a conspiracy theory. It's documented history. Even scholars like Bart Ehrman and Richard Pankhurst have noted how different Ethiopia's biblical tradition is, both in content and intent. While the West sought uniformity, Ethiopia preserved diversity. While the West centered Rome, Ethiopia listened to Jerusalem and to its own voice. And perhaps that's why Ethiopia's version of the Bible is so dangerous, because it doesn't just challenge what we believe about Lucifer, it challenges how we define truth. It reminds us that the Bible we know is not the Bible the early church knew, that there are ancient voices, prophets, scribes, saints who have been silenced, not because they were heretic, but because they were inconvenient.
So the question becomes, what do these erased scriptures still have to teach us? What wisdom did we lose when we chose to silence Ethiopia? Because these texts don't just expose corruption. They offer warnings, they describe patterns, and they name the danger clearly. Lucifer is not a distant myth. He is a recurring crisis triggered every time a leader exalts himself above the people, above morality, above God. And right now, that warning may be more relevant than ever. Because if the pattern of Lucifer is still alive, then someone must be wearing his crown. And that is where we go next. In our final section, we confront the chilling question: if Lucifer was a man, then who is Lucifer today? Not in metaphor, not in myth, but in reality.
If Lucifer was a man, then he didn't disappear. He didn't burn. He didn't fall into eternal darkness. He simply passed on the crown. And that crown, the symbol of pride, domination, false divinity, is still being worn. But not by the people we expect. You see, we've spent centuries looking for the devil in shadows, in horns, in flames, in the supernatural. But Ethiopia's ancient texts point us in a different direction. They tell us to stop looking down and start looking up, at thrones, at pulpits, at podiums, because the most dangerous evils don't rise from the underworld. They rise from ambition, from unchecked power, from the arrogance of men who believe they are gods. And that's what makes this question so terrifying. Who is wearing the crown of Lucifer today? Is it the billionaire who builds a digital empire and proclaims himself humanity's savior? Is it the dictator who rewrites history books and demands worship in place of God? Is it the leader who claims divine right to rule but leaves nothing but ruin in his wake? You see, Lucifer doesn't need to look evil. He just needs to look untouchable. That's the trick. That's always been the trick. In Isaiah's time, it was the king of Babylon. In Rome, it was Caesar. In the Middle Ages, it was rulers who used the church as a sword. And today, he's harder to recognize, not because he's hiding, but because we've grown used to his face. Ethiopia's scriptures were never just about theology. They were about recognition. They teach us that evil repeats, that tyranny has a rhythm, that every generation will face its own Lucifer, not with wings, but with wealth, not with fire, but with influence, not with a hiss, but with applause. And that's why these ancient warnings are so vital, because if we don't see the pattern, we'll serve it. So the next time someone demands obedience in the name of God, the next time a leader places himself above question, above law, above conscience, ask yourself, is this justice, or is this pride in disguise? Because Lucifer in the Ethiopian sense is not just the fall, he is the rise, the ascent of power divorced from humility. And the moment we forget that, we crown him again. Maybe he's not a single man anymore. Maybe he's become a system, a way of thinking, a structure that rewards pride, exalts self, and punishes truth. Maybe that's why these books were buried. Maybe that's why Ethiopia's version of the story was ignored for so long. Because it doesn't just question the identity of Satan. It questions the very foundations of power. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. So as we close, the final question is no longer, was Lucifer real? But who is he now?
And more urgently, who is helping him rule? If this made you rethink what you've always believed, type "Now I see" in the comments. Like this video if you believe truth should never be buried. Subscribe for more forgotten knowledge and ancient wisdom from Ethiopia and beyond.